All right, Reed, we're going to get into it. Contract flow down clauses.
Let's do it.
I'm super psyched about this because, first of all, that's not my gifting. I'm not into all the paperwork stuff that we wind up being involved in, but I know how important this is for folks here. So I appreciate you guys joining us. And I'm going to introduce Reed. Now, you're with Dacian. What does Dacian do?
Yeah, Dacian is like an industry provider of expertise in this area. We build software for folks that need help with making sure that they can track their requirements in all areas of government, federal contracting, and we also help people plan on how they can scale and all of that. But yeah, I was in the aerospace and defense space many years in sales and aerospace and defense, managing contracts for a local company out of San Diego, Cubic. If anybody knows Cubic.
Yeah, and 250 million, that's a reasonable amount of money that you're managing.
We did some good sized projects. We worked as I've been in the prime contract seat. I've been in the subby seat. I've been in a different tier. So I kind of know what it feels like to be in different positions as far as the contracting goes. When you're accepting contracts or you're trying to get your subcontractors help you fill your requirements. So we can go into a little bit of that today again, Dave.
Yeah, that's fine. I appreciate it, man. And your role, it's wild because we kind of got engaged with you guys last year, and clause manager is still germinating. So we're talking about that. But you actually handle SAP stuff, right? So we're going to ask some questions about that too. If you guys if you guys actually use SAP, some of the folks here, we'll find out who's using that. But this is not necessarily for SAP. We're talking about the importance of understanding this and having a process to be able to manage clauses, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's definitely right. We try to make it scalable here. We'll talk about some different options, what people have been doing in the industry, best practice. Whether you're a big shop that uses SAP, trying to make sure that people have options for things that are not SAP related. If they're a smaller startup, if they're trying to scale, if they're trying to just figure out how do I track all these things. But today we'll talk about a bit different things you might want to think about as you're in the different positions you might be as a rising company.
Yep. I appreciate that. And so we do have a disclaimer. We're not endorsed by any federal agency. It's informational purposes only, not legal advice, because there's some legal stuff happening with contracts, right? Doesn't guarantee an award or fixing clauses or problems with it. And any govies, if we have any govies here, let us know. Raise your hand so we can welcome you personally. Always love to have govies. I know most of this is going to be for vendors. It is being recorded, and data collection for AI purposes prohibited. You know why, Reed?
Why is that, Dave?
Because we're real freaking human beings here. That's why, Reed.
We are. I'm not an avatar, and like Dave said, I'm not a lawyer. But hey, I bring a lot of business practice to the table, and I want to help you learn from mistakes that I've made wherever I can, or draw awareness to. And we'll talk about that, Dave.
Oh man, he's
good story.
Crazy stories he's got, and I'm telling you, you don't want to repeat them. That's the first. I'll give you the teaser setup. All right. So what made you guys join us today? Are you new to federal contracting? You want to understand what this flow down stuff is? Maybe you're wondering if a specific clause applies to you. Maybe you have a contract issue with a prime or the government. Maybe. Or maybe just your boss made you come. And you can choose as many as you want here. And then if you're doing any federal business now, what type of work you're doing, and if you've ever been to a GovBrief session before. Welcome to everybody that's been here before. If you've been here before, you know what you're in for. If not, welcome aboard, because you're on for the ride. We love participation, as a matter of fact. You can pop things into the chat, just like where everybody's from. We love that. You can raise your hand and you can ask questions in the Q&A. We do have there's 154 people, so let's do this. Do me a favor. Do us all a favor. If you have a question, put it in the Q&A, because it'll get lost in the chat. Does that make sense for everybody? Thumbs up if you got that. Love the reactions as well, and we love the feedback. And thumbs up if you got that. There you go. Fantastic. Love it. And I'm putting the session docs in. Do me a favor as well. Thumbs up if you click on that and you get something that looks like this right here. These are all the handouts for you today. I want to make sure that you can get to them. Some people can't because their security functionality and all their cyber nudnicks out there keep us from getting there. If you can't get it, let me know. Send me a message, and we'll make sure you get those. Looks like everything's working. Reed, so we'll do that. In there, you have the presentation, you have executive orders. I don't know if you guys notice, but there's a couple of new executive orders. Do you know that, Reed? I know it's new.
Things have changed. A couple things have changed since we last talked, right, Dave? We're seeing a lot of movement across the government. I'm not going to tell you how to react to every single one of those. I can't keep up with them all, Dave, but I'll point you in the right direction. Save those documents that Dave gave you if you don't get anything else from today. There's a couple great tools in there. I'll try to touch on them briefly. We don't have a time to do a whole master class on this stuff. Again, I'm gonna try to go through the high points, what I think are the most risky things that you guys need to think about in this ever-changing environment, and think about how you might want to run it as a business as well.
Yep. And I think the most important thing, first of all, we did the introductions to Reed, and we'll talk a little bit about Clause Manager. Clause Manager is a new tool, right? Reed is a new tool, right, kind of birthed out of existing tools that have been used by you guys, right, at Dacian, right? And we'll talk about some case studies, but being able to understand what matters most to you and what they are, right? Flow down clauses, if you're not familiar with this, the types of them, and it's what about the annual audit for prime contractors and things like that? You're going to dip into that a little bit too?
Give you an idea of what you might expect.
Yep. And best practices for managing those. No matter how you do it, we want you to walk away with that. Q&A, we're going to keep things as tight as we can. We will have the ability to show what Clause Manager is at the end if you'd like to stick around. But we're going to talk about the best practices, and we'd like to interact with you guys too. If you have any trouble, if you have any issues, let us know, and we'll make sure we get you included in that. So about Clause Manager, the headquarters in North Carolina, right? And you're managing, as far as Clause Manager, as a system is managing 400 plus compliant prime contracts. You can see the kind of dollars that are flowing through this to make sure that mitigating risk is the biggest thing, right, Reed?
Yep.
And flow down through the entire supply chain. So it's not just you as the prime, it's flowing that down to your subs, because you can't outsource all the risk, can you?
No, it's true. We have a lot of companies who have systems like SAP or another ERP solution, where there's also a lot of companies that use something like a CLM tool. That's really big. If you're a big company, maybe you can't afford those things. Or if you're not a big company, maybe you can't afford those things. Maybe that's too much to bear. We're trying to get people that have access to other tool sets or other approaches, so you can be able to track all these requirements in the right way. And we'll talk about that a little bit today.
And you guys are also involved with some of the big primes on the right-hand side. I'm going to end this poll in about 10 seconds. So if you haven't answered it, get off of being a wallflower and get in the mix, because I got another poll coming up that's even more important. So do that in about 10 seconds. So tell me, so on the right-hand side, we're all familiar with just about everybody in there. And so you do a lot of work. Is this international as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got clients all over the world, all the big A&D companies. Hopefully, somebody from my customer base is on here today. If you are, give me a shout out. Look forward to always chatting with you guys. Always happy. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you know us. But anyways, yeah, I'll actually even show you a use of how Boeing does it, and something you might expect if you're down the supply chain, and how you might interact with somebody like that, and how they actually use a tool like the one we're showing today, which is a light version of their robust SAP tool.
Right, because a lot of folks don't have SAP.
That we built, yeah.
So what's your role in contracts? And while you're getting into that and letting us know your role, because it depends on your role as to how these apply to you, right? So you could be in senior management. A lot of folks are going to be in contracts and managing contracts. That makes sense, because that's what this is, right? But we could also have folks that are in quality assurance, because quality assurance is part of that flow down, isn't it, Reed?
Definitely. I mean, I think the biggest thing that people, as you're clicking into this poll, need to realize is we put them all out here because everybody in the business has a little bit of a stakeholder position of what the flow downs, what terms and conditions apply to their contracts, how they have to manage those if they're going out for other vendors, subcontractor support. And it doesn't stop at legal. I know we all want to glaze over these things and go, oh, that's the fine print, right? But you'd be surprised how many people don't even realize they exist. We'll talk about a little about mandatory and non-mandatory clauses today. Sometimes you don't even see the clauses. So I want to point you to some stuff that'll help you make sure you're aware of that.
Love it.
If you're in one of these other positions and you don't know the information.
So what are flow down clauses right out of the gate? Let's get us there.
Flow down clauses, you click on the next slide. If you're not familiar with it, is the government term for saying any sort of term and condition, the fine print on a contract that is a requirement that you have to meet in order to do the work, to fulfill your duties on the contract. It might span from simple performance requirements that are the level of quality that you need to do, like the quality of the boxes that you ship in, that kind of stuff. But when we're talking about flow down clauses in their historic nature, it's not just the terms and conditions. It could be a simple commercial clause, right, Dave? But and that's, I think, what we'll talk about a little bit today. It doesn't just apply to U.S. government requirements. It could be things that are on commercial contracts. It could be things that are in regulatory clauses that are outside of the DOD, but in their purest form that most people are referring to. So when I refer to a flow down, I'm just going to refer to anything that's collectively that you need to abide by in the contract, that is in probably the FAR or DFAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or the DFARs, that you need to make sure that you can support, and make sure that your vendors in support of your contract can also meet in order to fulfill the requirements of the contract.
And so you mentioned the FAR and DFAR, and then you could also have like prime clauses that they put in as commercial. That would be considered commercial then?
Yeah, it could be. And that's something that as a tier 2, you need to really pay attention to, because if a prime is sharing with you a set of flow downs that they're saying are required, it's on you to figure out, okay, which ones are actually coming from the government because you're familiar with the regulations, and which ones are them asserting their requirements on you that they might have in addition. That could be things like limitations of liability, the insurance requirements. It could be all sorts of things, right? But they are still flow downs that if a prime is giving to you, may be required of you because the government is requiring it, or it might be that just the prime contractor is requiring of you to do business with them.
And so we have a little bit of policy changes, just a little, like we mentioned earlier. Little thing called DOGE these days, huh?
Oh yeah.
Anybody heard of DOGE? I think it's brand new for everybody here. But and I do want to let me end this poll, and then we'll take a look at what they have to say. So a lot of folks in 69% procurement and contracting, and then the next one up is senior management. I wonder why senior management cares about it, huh? Because that's all real important for senior management.
Dave, this is a
hot button.
Yeah, it is. It's a hot topic. When we did a talk on this at the American Aerospace and Defense Leadership Summit in December, and it seemed like 90% of the conversations were about how do I manage my supply chain, and how do I make sure my costs are secure? How do I make sure my supply chain is going to be able to provide to my needs? And that's changing even more now, right? With all the tariffs talks, with all the other requirements, trying to onsource things domestically and all that. I'm sure everybody's in that bucket. We got a lot of switching of positions right now. But that all being said, the piece that we're going to be talking more about here today is how do you hold your supply chain accountable, right? Starting with the flow downs. How do I make sure that my supply chain is going to deliver the way I want them to? How do I, as part of that supply chain, deliver the way I need to so I can get paid? I mean, that's ultimately why we're here, Dave. I want to meet
Nobody wants to get paid, I don't think.
Those requirements, and I want to get cash.
Yeah. So, and I think what you got in this third bullet is the principle of risk assumption and risk management, right? That's what we're talking about. You need to know what your risk is in order to be able to manage it.
Absolutely. You can hear me?
Yeah. You just locked up for just a second.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Okay, sorry, but yeah, the thing is like, as you're managing your supply chain, if you're going out for vendor support, if you're going out and building subcontractors, especially major prime, and you're going out for major subs, if the prime contractor doesn't ensure that the flow downs are flowed down the right way, and not just flowed down, right, Dave? Enforced that they are actually supported. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, if you go out to the field and say, hey, I have some environmental social governance requirements, I'm supposed to source my goods from a fair trade organization or something like that. And I just tell my supplier, I go to a mass distributor and I go, hey, can you guys provide these goods to me? And they go, absolutely. And you say, hey, here's some of the quality standards that I care about. And then you don't follow up, and they go out and they buy from somebody who they're not supposed to be buying from. Well, that doesn't just fall on them. I mean, if you go out and deliver that and you don't verify that they did that, then you're going to be in a position where you're in non-compliance too. Ultimately, the government is starting to enforce this more and more and asking for more and more visibility down the supply chain. And we're seeing a big push for that, not only just from a requirements perspective, but also systematically to ensure that you're really doing that.
And you just brought something up because you're leading into this. What could possibly happen if you're not paying attention and reinforcing those flow downs to, I would say, the lowest common denominator all the way down the chain, right?
Yeah. So, if you guys don't hear anything else I say for the rest of the day, cautionary tale here, right, Dave? I mean, one of the biggest things is having visibility on where you're sourcing your stuff, mapping your supply chain, mapping your vendors, and then mapping the requirements and what they're giving to you and how they're getting it, right? So what happened with me was, as a quick tale, right? We had a requirement where we were selling to the Taiwanese government, right? An allied country. They want us to build some massive command center and do some sort of training operations and all that. We're doing millions and millions of dollars worth of work. And in order to get there, we have many different inputs, hundreds of thousands of vendors all around the world to compile all of this to a deliverable that is the command center, right? So you guys might be familiar with the Thai government and Taiwan government, and they don't want any sort of products coming from China. They have some anti-China procurement stuff going on, just kind of like we do, right? But this is not even necessarily a U.S. federal government requirement. This is just a commercial international sale. So we have flow downs from the government of Taiwan that say, please, no procuring anything. I don't want to see anything that says China on it, right? And part of this contract is every day that we delay the project, we can incur liquidated damages. If we don't meet delivery deadlines, we get penalized, and we want to avoid that at all costs. Well, unfortunately, there was somebody miscounted the laptops, and somebody went out in the field and bought a laptop that one of the buttons or something was made in China. I think it was something absolutely ridiculous, Dave. We did everything else right on the contract, and somebody in the field didn't understand that they couldn't buy anything. They didn't screen it. It didn't go through quality because we weren't making sure that this information was passed down to our field level engineers, that nothing in this project could be delivered that said made in China on it.
So you had somebody in the field, so an engineer type, right? They realized they didn't have enough laptops. They go to Best Buy or someplace like Best Buy, right? Someplace to buy a laptop, and they buy the laptops. And then what happened when they landed?
Well, that's where everything came down and crumbled, Dave. I mean, we had $10,000 a day penalty or something until we retrofitted the problem. And because that one issue was gathered, we had to go through and reinspect everything else, thousands of units. It caused weeks of delay. So now all of a sudden we're not getting paid, but we're also getting penalized because we made one mistake, because we didn't properly, even internally document and in our systems, we weren't tracking that you couldn't buy anything from China. It was just a terrible scenario.
And that so you realize now, right? So the impact is, first of all, you're not getting paid. Now you're getting charged, and it was an internal problem of being able to communicate that through your organization down into in some of the subcontractors as well, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
So, obviously it impacted our cash. It delayed our thing. We want to help you to avoid these. I don't want you to get in a position where you order something and if you actually did pass these requirements on to your vendor and said nothing can be sourced from China or whatever it might be. This is just one example of one simple clause. If you're not ensuring that those requirements are flowed down to your first tier vendors and they're flowing those down to their vendors as well, something's bound to happen, right, Dave? I mean, it's so easy to overlook a simple requirement like this.
So I'm going to ask folks now, how do you manage your flow down now? Maybe you don't, and that's why you're here, or maybe it's as sticky notes and napkins, as we have all seen those, right? And maybe it's Excel, right? Maybe you're pulling those in and you're doing a mapping of your clauses, right? Or maybe you have a library of them, or you use, what does CLM stand for?
So that'd be a contract lifecycle management tool if you're familiar with the big ones. If you have a tool that helps you negotiate your clauses, maybe you go in and out of it for procurement if you're a larger company. A lot of folks don't use them because they're pretty heavy duty. They drive a lot of stuff, and the cost is pretty extensive for some of these larger CLM tools. And then you go to folks that have like SAP, and they're trying to track these things too, and then that's even bigger.
So, and I appreciate that. And so let us know what's the lead right now. Oh, it's 30% to 27 to 20. It's like neck and neck. Not doing it, Excel. And then folks who have a library of clauses, right? So you're collecting the clauses. You should be collecting clauses. Am I right, Reed?
That's right. Yeah, I think we'll show you that later. But yeah, I mean, step one, right, is at least to have an understanding of the clauses and some of the key differences as clauses change over time. Having access to that, having it in a way that you can track it against each contract that you have.
All right. So let's take a look at this. If we're now this is in your handouts, right? The presentation's in your handouts. So make sure that you have, and I want to check that to make sure that they are there, but I want to make sure you have this. So take us through this, how this works for a multi-tier flow down, how and what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think getting back to what I was just mentioning, right? Ensuring that you have buy-in from your suppliers and acknowledgement that they are going to uphold the flow downs is like the first essential step. I mean, even before that, making sure that you can meet those requirements and go out to vendors that are going to support you to do that is probably even the predecessor. If you think about it from a process map right down there at the bottom, Dave, you get a contract from, let's just say, the US government, and you're the prime. And you have to evaluate all these requirements on the contract by deliverable, by department, and you have to go out and evaluate which ones are applying to you, and then dissecting those and working with your execution team on the program level to go out and make procurements to support that if you're at that tier. If you're in the next tier down, right, and you're making some of those products to fulfill the requirements of your prime, you're going to be right in the middle of this supply chain map, right? You're going to be saying, okay, I have requirements from my prime that they've gotten from the government, and I need to make sure that I can meet those requirements. And if I can't hit them, I need to go out and go find somebody else down the line that can.
That's
Whatever tier you're at, Dave, I think it's the most important piece is to say, I know the tier and I know which position I am for every contract to understand what level of the requirements apply to me, because as you know, Dave, the larger you are, the more requirements you have. As you get smaller, you might have different requirements than the large ones do. And let's just see if there's anything else in here. Oh, obviously, as requirements change, right? We're in a big position where the government is looking at changing those requirements, making modifications to core flow down requirements, mandatory ones, non-mandatory ones alike, and they're going to impact every tier, no matter where they're at. I think you like to talk about the DOGE DEI scenario, right?
Oh my God.
Are those going to be really applicable, or are they not going to be applicable?
Yeah. And oh, by the way, it doesn't take an act of Congress, as we've seen, for these to get injected into the flow down, because the executive orders create that, right? Right, Reed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
And that can
the key
change
thing is
like that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's different types of regulations. Yeah, DEI is the hot topic right now, and that's one of them. Obviously, all the FAR and DFAR clauses that help you and support you and make it so that you can provide your contract to the federal government. But there's other examples down there that impact every level of the business. Financial clauses, how you're going to get paid, what you have to prove to get paid. Those are flow down clauses. There's quality clauses, as I mentioned, right? It's going to impact every system in your business. I think that's where people get tied up. They're like, oh, I'm only used to dealing with flow down clauses for my accounting because I need to show what I'm billing for and how I'm billing for it, or I have to meet certain billing requirements, right? I mean, we help people with that too, so they can track those in their ERP system. But it impacts property management. If you're managing government property or materials, it sort of manages or dictates how much level of your earned value requirements you might have, how you're tracking your materials or sourcing your materials, right, as you go through the purchasing process. And I think even the most important thing is, I kind of re-loop this whole circle, is the estimating side. And that's something we'll hone in on the next bits of this deck is, how do I think about this from the front so I thoroughly evaluate my contract requirements to even say, should I be estimating this work and bidding on it? I think as salespeople, which is I'm sort of in that position now, if I'm going to look at the requirements of a job, I'm trying to sell the government some software, I need to make sure that I'm going to be able to thoroughly bid on those and support the requirements, because some of these are cost prohibitive. Some of these administration requirements are very heavy, and if you don't have a system in place, let alone to track these flow down requirements, but to do everything that they call for, you might be in a position of non-compliance, and that's what you want to make sure you don't get into.
Are you insinuating that salespeople will say yes before they understand what the real scope is? Are you insinuating that?
I would never say that, Dave.
Hey, I am one. I can say these things. And we have a comment in the Q&A. Just an observation that the references provided in the handouts is outdated. Okay, subcontracts for commercial products and commercial services was updated in January 2025. Thank you very much, anonymous attendee. We will update that and make sure we get that updated for everybody. See that? We're not even, the handouts aren't even updated. So we got to make sure we do that. So take us through this. And that's because we pulled it from last year's presentation and I didn't look at it.
We did.
So
that's a good point, Dave. I mean, these regulations are changing all the time.
They are.
And we'll point you to some sourcing efforts for it. Trying to give you some examples of things you might see more than tell you these are the exact terms. Again, I'm not giving you all of the advice on everything you have to follow today. So just keep that in mind. I'm trying to give you some guidance on things that might come up that you need to look for and be aware of. Because as pointed out, they'll change from 2 months to the next 2 months.
Or yesterday.
Yeah, just yesterday. Exactly.
So
exactly.
So now this piece is enough to wreck your brain. So take us through this as best we can within a few minutes, Reed.
No, Dave, I made this one just specifically to confuse you. I wanted to make sure you didn't know what we were talking about. No, I'm just kidding. Here, this is a great diagram for those of you that are just getting into this and you want to think about, where do I need to be facilitating discussions at all levels of the business, from the earliest stages of evaluating a contract to executing it and interacting with your supply chain, to closing out a contract and making sure that you get paid for everything you're trying to perform to, right? This is just a process map of, something to think about. Take this away, think about it a little bit. These typical activities for each one of these areas are going to have some interaction with flow down requirements. You're pursuing something and you need to see, what are my contractual requirements and how do I need to track them and how do I need to evaluate them for an estimate or proposal. As I start kicking off that contract and I need to see, what are my flow downs that I need to fulfill and how do I track them for billing purposes or for the government property that I'm going to be intaking if it applies to my contract. Obviously, as you're going through the execution of the contract and you're going through claims and other changes, constantly evaluating which products are being affected by this. And I think the most important is the middle here, as you're thinking about the supply chain and the supply chain mapping, as you're holding your vendors accountable to to those procurement flow downs, all the requirements you're pushing out to the next level, and they're executing as they go out to other vendors down their supply chain, how that impacts it. And then once you actually perform and you move on to, okay, how am I tracking all of my costs? How am I how is that going to impact the way that I'm going to invoice the customer, and tracking those for performance delivery, and obviously at the end of the day, showing all the reporting that has to be done by these flow downs.
And sometimes that gets delegated to the subs, right? So the subs have to know what they're in for too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things, if you're talking about a simple scenario, if you're doing something and your vendor has to justify the cost of what they're doing, and they need to show you some of their proof of the way that they estimate, the way that they executed, so that you can gather up that information and include it in your billing to the federal government. If you make a mistake and you don't have that as a requirement up front, you might be in a position where you can no longer enforce it, right? Mm. I think whatever the requirement is, you want to thoroughly screen the flow downs that you have to pass through, whatever tier you're on, so that you can make sure that you're not in a position where you can't enforce something later on. And that really does start at the beginning of this process.
So I really want to encourage folks to review this and kind of absorb it, because this one gives me a headache, Reed. Just saying. This one gives me a headache because there's so much that's involved. But if you break it down by each component and say, all right, what do we need at the beginning and what we want in the middle, I think this is really a great layout. I don't know how long it took you to make this thing, but
5 minutes, Dave. That's it. No, I think the importance of this is to try to bring you awareness. Like, we have mostly lawyers here, or maybe not lawyers, legal kind of contracts minded people. Mm-hmm. If you're getting into this for the first time, or you're just doing it and you're saying, okay, how do I avoid future mistakes, and how do I do this well? Involve all levels of the organization as soon as you can, because it's going to have some level of impact in these areas. You're going to need to involve your risk management folks. You're going to need to involve your program management folks. You're going to want to estimate to the level of the requirements that you have to meet, and making sure that you have the systems in place. All of those things, very important. And from the very beginning, making sure that you have the right flow downs to share with your procurement people, and not just cutting and pasting what the prime contract requirements are. Because I've been in a position where I was a sub and I'm getting all these requirements flowed down to me, and they don't make sense because they don't apply to me as a sub, or for the business, or the requirements that I have to fulfill. And I'm not afraid to go back and say, these don't apply to me. I'm not going to blanket accept these. Don't just flow these all down to me, because I am not going to accept them, and I can't do that work, right?
Couldn't agree more. Let's talk about the risks, because that's what we're really trying to manage. How much risk do we have, and whether we should even do this contract at all sometimes, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I see the government putting more and more of a press on all levels of suppliers, but ultimately it's on the prime, because the prime is the ringleader. They are the essential focal point for everything that has to be performed and be met within a project, right, Dave? I mean, at the end of the day, if they don't meet the requirement, they're going to be held accountable. They need to be able to hold their vendors accountable, and that's first places to do it is by asserting the right level of the requirements that you need to flow down to them, and then enforcing them, auditing them to make sure that they're doing it. And if it's a multi-tier flow down, what do I mean by that? If there's multiple vendors in that supply chain, it's the best case is to track it all the way through, and to ensure that not that you're trying to overstep and skip and try to take over the supply chain for your vendors, but validating down the supply chain that the requirements are being passed on, from you to them, and then from them to their next supplier, but also that they're being, that they're actually validating that they're being met. So
I love that. And Kelly has a great question. What recourse does a sub to prime have to refuse or redline flow down clauses?
Yeah, I mean, I could do a whole masterclass on that one, Dave. But high level, right? It depends, right? It depends what position you're in. Are you the vendor?
Depends
Are
on the
you the
clause
prime?
too, right?
It
Because
does depend on the clause
if
because
it's
there's
a FAR
mandatory.
clause, you're not redlining anything.
That's right. And there's mandatory clauses that apply to all federal contracts that may not even be listed on there. I think we go into that in the next one. But the ability to reject a clause is definitely an opportunity, and I would, if you believe and know that it doesn't apply to you. I think there's a key difference there. Can you reject a clause because you just don't want to do it? You're going to probably have a real hard time doing that. And you're probably not going to get the work just because you don't want to do it or you can't meet it. That's a different story. But if it doesn't really apply to you because you're a smaller customer, you're a smaller vendor, and you don't meet the thresholds, but it is a really hard challenge. I see the note from Barbara. We're hearing rumblings in the government that the government wants to add requirements to map and control your vendors, and not just your vendors, but your customers. Across aerospace and defense, they want to know where parts are coming from, where they've been remanufactured, where they've been used, where they've been applied. And there's talks about making that part of the requirements of executing or dealing with aftermarket parts, because you don't want a bad part to show up that was dispatched and thrown into a junkyard and came off the street and they don't know where it came from, and then it's remanufactured under a different business's label and sold as something new. So that's one example of not only vendor mapping, but aftermarket mapping as well.
And I think to this slide, Barbara just set this up. It's impossible to have numerous vendors in the supply chain and deny that it applies to them. Well, that's why this is so important and why Clause Manager was built. Just setting a plug in for Clause Manager for this and what you guys have built in to do with SAP, right? That's what you do. You actually are doing that to drive it all the way down through the food chain, right?
Obviously, the number of these clauses that are going to be applicable and mandatory and required in order to meet your business requirements may be changing, but I won't dispute that. The thresholds for what size of a company has to abide by certain flow downs, it's probably changing, especially under the new administration. I mean, that's definitely happening, but that doesn't give us the excuse to, I've already had conversation, like they're not going to let us off the hook for ensuring that down the supply chain, at least at each level, you're ensuring that the requirements have been met. I think that is not going to be something anybody's going to see relief on anytime soon.
And there it is crazy, Barbara. I think you're right. Number one, because she's saying it would be a nightmare tracking that a small prime, most are mandatory clauses that are shortlisted in the government contract. That's correct. And most level tier subs cannot refuse. That's absolutely correct too. Yeah. And not only that, I had that happen when I went to my CFO. We had a master service agreement. This was years ago, with a master service agreement, and he wanted to redline everything. And I said, look, you can either choose to get on the bus or stay off the bus. You're not redlining any of this. So, and they didn't, because they knew that the master service agreement, that's a whole bunch of clauses that get passed on because something bad happened along the way. And a lot of that doesn't apply, but you just can't redline that. They're not going to let you. So anything you want to talk about some of the challenges? Obviously, there's tension. There's always going to be tension in it. And,
there is. Everybody's been in a position where they want to take on the work and they want to win a contract. But if you can't meet the requirements and you can't challenge the requirements, I just recommend people take a step back and say, do I really want to try to do this work? Does it even make a business case for me to scale my processes and systems to do it? At that point of time, if I can't get a waiver for something, something we see a lot, is prime contractors flowing down all of the requirements, and it may be practical that they do it, right? They may just say, here's a copy and paste of the contract, all these things apply to you, accept it or don't. And it's like, well, that's one way of doing it, but just because the prime has to follow all those requirements doesn't mean that the next tier vendor has to follow all of them. And it may not apply to you. And I just say, screen them effectively and don't be afraid to question, okay, whether or not it really does apply to you or not, because it may be not applicable to your level in the supply chain.
And Carly's saying that, right? Regularly, we have multiple flow downs, and you guys can see it in the Q&A, I think, right? You can see it in the Q&A, but we're and then you start self-deleting, and then you formally reject the ones that don't apply, and then you're excited to see one of them because that gives you a competitive advantage, right? Because that's what, hey, we can do this. And then there's 10 pages of non-applicable flow downs is what it says. And that's exactly right. That's what everybody has the same problem. Would you agree with that, Reed? That everybody has that problem?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people struggle with this same thing. I mean, yes, sink. You can. Yes, you can go through and know that they're self-deleting and all of that. I think you want to make sure you do that due diligence up front and make sure you don't take on anything that you don't have to.
Yep. And I love what you said, Carly. And it has not created any improvement in not flowing down the whole kitchen sink.
Yeah, right. That's right.
That's so true. All right. So let's talk about mandatory and non-mandatory. What's that mean?
Yeah, right. So, for those who aren't familiar with mandatory, non-mandatory clauses, right, there are clauses that exist that are applicable by specific contract because of the type of work you're doing, and those might not always apply. They might not always be mandatory. And then there's mandatory clauses that you'll see a lot of times listed on the contract, and there's other ones that are not silent because they still apply. They are mandatory and apply to all contracts, and they're blanket like executive orders, like some of the stuff we're hearing about now. And so there's a pretty good resource in here that we've shared that talk about mandatory clauses that apply and you should be well aware of. Even if you're in a program management position and you're not in charge of these legal requirements, knowing that these mandatory clauses may or may not be applicable to your contract, knowing that they exist, I think is something I just want to make sure nobody overlooks. I think that's why we're pointing it to here.
And I think are you talking about the smart matrix piece for later?
Yeah, we can talk about that. That's definitely a tool that can help you sort through all the different types of clauses by the type of clause that they are, by the category, and what they might apply to. If you're not familiar with that matrix, it's a tool that the government puts up.
If you don't have a headache right now, pop that one open.
No, yeah.
So let's talk about some best practices, and then we'll give some additional insight. Michael put in the host and panelists. I'm going to post that. Michael, post that for everybody, not just us, for looking at that document. Go ahead. Best practices. Take us there, Reed. Did you freeze up on me?
Oh, sorry. What was that? It did break up.
Tell us best practices. Take us through the best practices.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So I think we've already beat this one down a little bit. I just want to make sure that whatever position you are within the tier of suppliers, that you're willing to be open to the fact that hey, mistakes can be made. Maybe I overflowed down clauses and I need to reevaluate that. Yeah, it's pretty easy to do, especially when a flow down might be applicable to a product versus a service. Mistakes happen. Be willing to reevaluate it and look at it and say, hey, okay, well, maybe I didn't need to flow that down to my supplier. And if you're on the supplier side, you're willing to look at it and understand what is really applicable to you, what is, a hard, if you're just talking about FAR and DFARS, what is a hard requirement, it's mandatory, and you're not going to get out of it if you can truly meet it. But also sift through the additional terms and conditions that are being flowed down from your customer that says, hey, we also want you to do these things. There's a way to strive for equality in clauses that make it so you're not having to do things that are above and beyond what your prime contractor has to do either. But there are many different clauses. There's things that apply to federal, state. There's things that apply to commercial. There's other clauses that you may be just mandated from your customer. That is not a federal clause, that is not mandatory, but they're going to require you to meet it. So I would just say you need to tailor those flow downs for each procurement. I know it's hard to do. If you do repeat business, then maybe you can streamline that and do it time and time again. And we can show you what a system might do to help you do with that. But if they're not applicable, then you need to make sure that, you're not losing sight of them.
And when we look at what you're going to be showing us in a minute, the ability to say and report back up the food chain. So dealing with what Barbara was talking about and understanding what clauses apply to us and how we can feed that back up. Is there a process to be able to get that back up to the prime to say, hey, I don't think this applies to us, without irritating them to a place where they're saying, well, stop being a pain. So because being a pain doesn't.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Dave. I mean, that's one of the key things, that these things take time. It's hard to do this in a short period of time when you're bidding on contracts. You're trying to wrangle all your suppliers and make sure that you have the clauses met when people are bidding on the work that you have. And there's ways to do it systematically as well as do it manually by sharing them. We can talk about a couple of ways you might do that. But there is definitely a flow up process that we see more and more customers adapting so that their vendors can look at what requirements there are and make recommendations and suggestions to revise them to what is equitable or meetable, if it is a negotiable clause or should be negotiated.
No doubt. We got a couple of questions here. First of all, Michael Lamont's asking SAM.gov is barren. Where else can a contractor find good DOD contracts? That is a great question, Michael. I have my own perspective on that because of the pursuits that I have done in the federal space. Because I'm telling you, 98% don't show up on SAM.gov. Period. Let that sink in for a minute. So yeah, you need to develop those contracts. We could talk about that at another time, and maybe you and I can do a sidebar on that, Michael. And then another one is coming in from an anonymous. I don't know how that works from an anonymous attendee, but here we go. What is the best way to find public law or executive orders that make clauses statutory? Great, that's a great question. And how do you find that stuff? I know for the executive orders, it's right there in the White House, right? The White House press releases, and they put them out every time there's an executive order. So that part is there. But public law, how do you do that, Reed?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of resources in here to point to some places you might source it. I think that's one of the hardest things that people struggle with when they are putting together how they're going to do their contracting processes, right? And for me, this is really you're actually feeding right into why we created some light software tools to help people do this, because step one is knowing all the applicable clauses that could be a requirement of your contract, whether that is commercial code, or whether that's FAR DFARS, or whether that's something else that is mandated by one business to another, and being able to track those to the right level of the contract and understanding what version of those are, and being able to know everything that exists and what you can and can't accept as a business. Why? And when you do that, I guess, Dave, I don't know if we have another page here after this, but I think it's a great segue.
I got a poll coming up next, which I can ask. All right, so we're gonna start wrapping this up. We're gonna get some additional resources. Laura has one in the Q&A. I'm gonna copy and paste that from Laura. First of all, people are asking about me, so there's my information that you can get that. I'm going to make sure everybody can get this as well as part of the Federal Register. I actually have stuff from Federal Register in there, right? That's some of the pieces that we got in the handouts. So Laura, we'll get that there for you. But if you want to stick around and see Clause Manager, because the objective is to talk about best practices and then provide you with a tool to be able to do some of these things to help you. Because as Lisa says, is there a site that is good at explaining what a FAR clause means, especially since we're not all lawyers? Boy, Lisa, don't we wish. I love that. I don't think that there's a site for that. I think that, what would you say to that? I'm not going to say.
Well, no. I mean, there's a lot of tools that are coming out to help people with this. I think we're at a really unique pivoting point with the emergence of technology and AI, and the availability and ease of developing software that can help you with managing things like this. Software that's complex, that tracks flow downs against line items and does things against your ERP system and all that. Obviously, that's complicated. But being able to look at a clause or have something scan a contract that can read it and digest it and say, here's all my individual requirements, and then run that through maybe an AI tool that can say, hey, these are the potential impacts of each of these clauses and what you might think about if you or if you're going to have to abide by one of these clauses. We're there. I mean, we are on the cusp of being able to do that. I shouldn't say on the cusp of, it's being done. And that's kind of actually one of the things that we've developed, is the ability for somebody to read a contract, use AI and use software to scan a contract, break it down into specific requirements. And the next evolution of that is running it through chatbot and being able to understand what they are. Do I have really good resources for you? I don't think everybody shares those secret sauce items that will bring out there publicly, but there's plenty of stuff that'll say, hey, here's what you might consider, but the government is not breaking it down into layman's terms on any of their side officially. No.
Ever breaking it down, because it's written by a bunch of freaking lawyers. That's why. All right, Stephanie says, Dave, we've been primed on 95% of our awards. Strategically, we're looking for looking to be a sub and finding the right company to go into the DOD mentor protege program. Let's you and I talk, Stephanie, because I think there's ways as well. I put my information in there, but I'm sure there's other folks that are in the same boat that would like to find teaming partners, right? Anybody? Thumbs up if you want to find teaming partners. We can talk about how we can do that as well. Thumbs up. There we go. Knew it. All right, Stephanie, love that. So just send me an email. We'll make sure we connect. And anybody else, if you want to be involved in that too, Reed, I think a lot of that's on the front end of this and winning contracts as opposed to managing them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll give you a couple more minutes to do that. We will get you what you want. There's 27 people that want to stick around and see Clause Manager in action. For those of you who do not want to, included in the resources, you'll get a video recording, all the session docs. You'll be able to do one-on-one meetings with Clause Manager and or Reed and the folks at Dacian, depending on where you are in the food chain of size of organizations. Because Reed, you handle SAP. That's your sweet spot, right?
Yeah, we work with all the large and down to the medium and emerging contractors that are doing any sort of business with the federal government, whether you're energy or defense or construction or oil, it doesn't matter, life sciences. We help the larger ones take advantage of how they use their SAP for this specific area, as well as many others. But the reason why we developed Clause Manager and why we made that available, which you'll see here in a minute, it's just a lighter version that is not based on SAP, that SAP users and non-SAP users can interact with each other alike using this tool, was because we wanted to make something that was accessible to the smaller and emerging supply chain base that still have to meet requirements and don't want to do it on the back of a napkin.
That's right. I can appreciate that. And you also have these resources that you guys can go to, acquisition.gov. You can see the FAR. And what is ECFR? What is that? ECFR.gov.
I think that's the electronic code of federal regulations.
Okay.
It's a great site to look through and scan through these resources if you want to see what are required.
And we also have the Dow. And I'm going to go here to the Smart Matrix because for real quick before we bounce into what you want to show us, because this is kind of wild. And you showed me this yesterday, and it's enough to give me a headache. So you can choose the FAR or GSA. You see it? General GSA stuff, right? So if you choose just this and show the complete matrix, that's what we printed out for you guys and handed it out there. I think this is it, right? We just did apply, and now you get to be able to see. Just scroll. I'm just scrolling just for a minute. Is there anything in here that you want to stop on, or anything you want to show people how this kind of works at a high level? We have the effective date. Some of these go back way back, and some of these are brand new, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole segment on how you might leverage this tool. But if you click in on the left hand side of one of those links, and if people aren't, it doesn't matter which one you choose, it's going to take you right to the requirements of that clause that may be showing up on a contract you're receiving. If you're not familiar, anti-kickback procedure, that's a great one. That one's hot topic all the time.
But I want a kickback. But I want a kickback.
I know, me too. But we shouldn't do that, Dave.
Hey, I'm just joking. All right. So take a look at that, and we're going to talk. And there's other additional pieces that you can find with this. First of all, great stuff. And if you have to bounce, we know you have to bounce. If you want to stick around to see Clause Manager, we'll show you some of that. We wanted to give you stuff that you take away, and you're welcome, Michael. And everybody can at least start the process here of knowing, number one, the importance of your position, right? Where do you fit in the supply chain, and what risks do you take if you're either ignoring flow downs? Don't do that, right? Don't just go by hope, right, Reed?
That's right, Dave. You open yourself up to a lot of risk. Being able to track and have the opportunity to review and digest and know which clauses you can accept as a business is just step one. I don't want you to be in a position where you accidentally accept a clause that says, I can't source anything from China, and that's where all your microchips are made, and you're bringing in all your material to consolidate things in the US, but it's got China written all over it, and you can't sell something that has China on it. I don't want to harp on that one, but that's just one of the biggest lessons learned. Internal and external checks, systematic checks that you can have to ensure that those requirements, those big requirements that are not negotiable, that are going to be a hindrance to your contract performance, making sure that those are visible internally and externally across all your process streams.
Love it. And for the anonymous attendee, is the Excel provided in the D column or PC, mean prime or contractor? I don't know, because that's not my world, but do you happen to know right off the top if that because where we were? Let me go back to here. Maybe it'll just
no. That's just this is a repository of all clauses that fall under the federal acquisition regulations, and these are the current versions and the effective dates and everything that apply to them. Yep, you could go through, and again, it would take a lot of time to go through this and how they apply to each one of these areas. But these are really the full list of all regulations that may be applicable to the work.
I think the question is, what does this mean, P or C? And the answer is, it doesn't have a key. Typical.
No. A provision.
Typical
It's a provision or a clause, is what it was.
A provision or a clause. Yeah. There you go. That's what it means. Provision or clause, anonymous attendee. There is no legend, and that is a problem, Marine. And we will record the Clause Manager demo, Lisa, if you like. So if you want to bounce and then come back to the recording, we'll do that as well. And what does the A stand for? You know what we're gonna do, Reed? We're gonna do one of these things. We're gonna do a deep dive into this. For vendors, we just got to do it. That's what we got to do.
That might be helpful, especially for those folks that don't have familiarity with it or just trying to get into this space and see what they can or can't bid on, how to actually navigate this space on a more technical level. That might be helpful. Hope everybody who came today really appreciated just the awareness and visibility into some of these hot topics. If it was new to you, I hope I shared something that saves you some penalties and some time and anguish later on.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you very much, Wendy and Joy, putting stuff in the chat, helping people. Oh, let me get this. Wendy said, I'm going to put what Wendy said, which is provision. And then Joy puts out, this is what Joy put out for this. A is for applicable. Bam. So we got Joy, and I want to give the shout out to Joy and Wendy for helping with that. I love this. I love when people are helping each other read, because this stuff gives me a headache.
Thank you both. Yes, right. Absolutely.
And there's
beat me to it.
By the way, there's 12 people, 23% that responded. Reed needs to give some aspirin. All right, Reed,
there we go.
Give us some aspirin on how you're going to be able to solve this problem using Clause Manager, because that is the solution that we're going to show now. So thanks for joining us. If you have to bounce, we got you. And Maureen, I have no idea. She's asking questions about those. We're going to do a deep dive on this, and we'll reach out and let everybody know what it's going to take to do that. Appreciate that. Go ahead and pop us in. Go ahead. Can you share out, Reed, and I'll stop sharing. You ready?
Marine optional. Optional is what it stands for the O. But yeah, we could. I'd talk about this all day. I don't want to put Dave to sleep. I'm sure he's at his limit with all this legal stuff.
I'm over it. I was over my limit when you started talking about some of when I looked at that matrix, my head exploded already. That was yesterday. I still haven't recovered. So for those of you who have to leave, great. Thanks. Thumbs up if Reed did a great job on this part of the presentation, and now you can stick around and see the new thing. And by the way, this is in beta, right? We're in beta right now, and you're going to show us how it works, right, Reed? Can you go ahead?
Yeah.
Is it working?
We'll go ahead and do that. And it's more than even beta there, Dave. I think we have the fundamentals of a solution that will help anybody, whatever tier you're at, to stop putting stuff on an Excel or the back of a napkin, right? I think I want to get you to the point where at least you can systematically keep track of all the clauses, right? I want to know, and here's an example of a real contract or a continuation sheet from a real contract. I want to know if this clause with this text for this period of time, that is my DFAR clause, what it applies to, and that it applies to this contract in a system. So every time I get a question about a contract, I don't have to open up the contract and reread through it for 2 hours to find out what is applicable or not. The goal of what we've tried to do is get people to an end state, which this is an example of what we've done with Boeing, which has this PDF is purely driven out of our solution that we developed with them as an extension of their SAP tool. Let them take all the contract clauses and assign it to a contract that's in their system that they can see at all levels, all line items, all slins, clins, all of that, which clauses are applicable to their contract as an internal document, at least, that says, hey, these are all of my customers' requirements for this contract. And I want to share these.
How many people can understand what Reed is showing here? Thumbs up if you get it. And let us know if you have a question about what you're saying. Good. Because I think I get, even though I'm not a contract guy, legal guy. All right, you're on track there, Reed. All right, make sure we're getting it.
I'm speaking somebody's language, hopefully, because I helped collaborate on this tool, and I tried to build it for some of the gaps that I had myself. I wanted to know what was applicable to my contract and what clauses I needed to share externally to my suppliers as I managed my contracts in the field. And step one was digesting all those contract requirements and saying that these apply to my contract for this delivery order, for this PO, whatever it might be, and having it done in a system and being able to generate some sort of summary like this for my internal stakeholders so that they could in turn go out to vendors or go out and execute a project, all the way down through everything that might be applicable at the line item level. So I'm going to get off of this. You can actually see that's on the Boeing supplier website, a good representation of a contract that became an internal document that was later used to drive supplier flow downs. But if you go to our website, Dave.
I was just saying, so you can cherry pick what is effectively needing to go down to the subcontractor level based on what they're supplying at the task order level?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right.
I mean, that's what you have to do, right? I mean, if you know anything about tracking flow downs and requirements, you might have one line item that's a product versus a service, and you'll have different flow down requirements for delivering a product and the quality of those and mill specifications and all that kind of stuff than you would for a service that you're providing, that you need to make sure you're sourcing good labor and tracking people's time a certain way and all of that, making sure you're hiring good people who are certified U.S. citizens, all that kind of stuff. So you'll have different requirements for even different line items on your contract and slins and clins and all that, all the way down to the bottom. And then when you go out and and bid for those work, you're going to have to track those requirements back to the line item level so that you make sure that you've not only met them for the contract, but also down to the delivery item.
No doubt. So
Right. And that's just government contracting, right? So we're trying to help people make sense of that. You can do that obviously in a SharePoint. You can do that in Excel if you want to. It's going to look a lot like that matrix that people use, but we tried to create something that was simple, that anybody could use, that's tangible and affordable, that helps streamline and help you manage your process without using some big CLM tool or an SAP system like that. So step one, create a clause. I mean, we have a dashboard here that says, hey, I have a whole bunch of clauses, and you might want even some process around to say, hey, I don't want anybody to tell me that clause is acceptable. I want to know that I've reviewed it, or somebody internally in my company who knows how to review it. Maybe it's myself. I can review and approve clauses. I can review and approve contracts. I can enter in all this data. But step one is actually having a repository of clauses that's as simple as importing all the clauses that are off of the FAR and DFAR sites, right? Like some of those websites we showed you. We have a clauses section. This is what we call kind of a clause library. So instead of just having these on a loose piece of paper and trying to keep track of all the different versions over time, we've made it so you can actually assign clauses for specific versions of those clauses to contracts in a system. So you can say these clauses in my library, for whatever version they are, maybe that's the timestamp date for that FAR clause, is applicable, it's understood, and it's something that I can apply to a contract. I'll show you what that looks like. But we have a lot of different space in here where you can put in as much details as you want, and you can track versions, you can track what they're applicable to. You can go all the way down to, are they even applicable to specific vendors if you want to. We made it so people have some audit logs. So if somebody tries to change the information or put a new version in the system, we track that.
that's important.
So it is really important, Dave, because these things change over time. You have to know sometimes if a clause has been updated and you have to follow the newest version if that's applicable to your contract. Other times, it might have a new version might be released on a clause, right? But
yeah. Look at DEI, right? DEI, the executive order said that's coming out of everything that we're doing right now and anything in the future, right? Isn't that what happened?
That's what they did. There's other ones that you don't have to abide by a change like that because it's not an executive order or something along those lines. You might be able to say, I negotiated a contract clause that was from 10 years ago, and that's the one that's applicable to my contract, and I don't have to follow the new regulations on it. So being able to track that I agreed to the old one against this contract is just as important as being able to update this and say, hey, the new one's applicable now, specifically for this contract.
And so they have the ability to do it themselves, and then there's also just a fundamental library that is included. How does that work?
Yeah, we can help clients fill up their library with everything that's applicable to their business. We actually have another extension of this tool. I don't think we'll have time to show it here today, but you can actually read the contract and put it in a format that can be loaded in here specifically for the clauses that come in. That's kind of the next evolution of this tool. We're looking for early adopters who want to take this clause tool, and we'll get there in a second, Dave.
How many people need that part? Where they just put it in and it gets sucked out and says, boom, here they are. I knew it was coming. Because that resonates with me because I hate this paperwork stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got a bunch of paperwork nudniks here too. I know there are. I'm a propeller head and with the IT stuff, but this stuff is killer. Awesome. You're solving my biggest issue, which is me. Go ahead.
Well, we want to automate as much as we can. We were talking about reading contracts and using AI. Next, the long-term vision for this is for me to get to that point where I could say, hey, Dave, I actually can take a look at these and get some influence or some insight by something that's learned what the implications of these clauses are. We're not there yet. We'll get there. That'll be a future evolution of this tool if we can make this thing adaptable by the industry. But the folks that are using it right now can use it to, like I said, track the clauses, all the versions of those clauses and changes to those clauses over time, and even run some workflow on who can say that those are legitimate clauses or not in the system just by managing the clause library that I showed you on the previous slide. Then you can actually take those clauses and assign them to a contract. And you can say, hey, my contract by crime, by PID, whatever I want to track it down, whatever task order, I can track it and say, hey, these clauses down here apply to my contract, and it's for this version, and this is the description of it. And I can click in and just look at it and say, oh, yeah, that's my clause. And I can go dig into the details of it. You can also assign other clauses to it. And if that's not sufficient, you want to do it at the line item level, you can do it at the line item level and say line item 1 has a specific clause assigned to it. I don't want to show people how to use a system, but it's as simple as saying, oh, yep, I have this clause that applies to my contract. I'll add those or I'll assign them all, and those go out and they become part of my contract. The cool part is if you really, really want to control this whole solution, you can go to the level where you want to see, okay, somebody just created this new contract. This is the one that I staged, and you want to submit it for approval. You can submit it to somebody. There's some cool workflows around this. But getting to the point where once you accept them, once you go ahead and approve it, the evolution of this is to generate a connection to a purchase document. You can actually share these clauses with your suppliers if you have a supplier network and do it systematically. So you're not just sending PDFs, and you can interact on this tool. That part is still in beta. We would love to get some suppliers to help us test that out and see how this process can work for the industry, so that there's an exchange of flow downs and traceability in their system that says these clauses apply to my contract and they apply to your flow down, and you can adapt those and receive those as well.
So with that, because I think for the biggest challenge, and I think everybody has the biggest challenge, whether you're a sub or a prime, is understanding which ones are for me as a sub or for the sub that they need to flow down. So let me make sure I understand what you said. So once you accept that clause as part of your contract, then you can determine which subs that should flow down to, and then does the system do a notification to the sub, or do they have to be part of the system?
No, even if the subs are not part of the system, the vision is you can send them a notification, they can sign up, and they can do the same thing with the clauses that you got, and they can manage their contracts in this tool too. I mean, that's the vision. That's hopefully the way that people would take advantage of this, so that they don't have to recreate the wheel and they can automatically do that. But at least you can have a way to automate the exchange of clauses and track the clauses that you have on your contracts and be able to send them out to your next tier down if you have suppliers in support of that.
So at minimum, they get the PDF and saying this is what applies to you as a sub, and then they have the option to be able to be included in the system. Which, oh, by the way, I would think when they accept it, then it'll show under your system that it's been accepted all the way down the food chain. Is that right? Is that the idea?
We're still looking at how vendors might want to do that. That's the vision of it, is to make sure that people can have that visibility. If their supply chain is willing to share that with them, we could absolutely engage that and create the concept of vendor mapping and vendor compliance mapping.
How cool would that be? Thumbs up if everybody got what I just said. I mean, I love that.
The hardest part is nobody can do it manually. I think people were on the call were saying, hey, I don't have the ability or the time to do that with the thousands of vendors that I have and the thousands of vendors that their vendors have. But if you could systematize this and at least have a way of saying these clauses have been accepted, then, man, you're going to be eons into the future of being able to check the box of your compliance and ensuring that your vendors have also received visibility on these flow downs as well.
And so Tony's saying, I want a platform that flows down all required clauses and provisions to my subs. We have to log in and digitally accept and acknowledge all the flow downs. So there's a system of record for any DOD audits. Amen, Tony.
That's exactly where we're going. Yeah. Not everybody can maintain a robust system, but having a system like this would give you the ability to track those clauses against your contracts and track the clauses that you're flowing down to your suppliers, even if you don't manage your suppliers through this portal and they don't want to interact through a service portal like this. The goal of this is to allow mid-tier suppliers to check the box on those requirements at the flow down level for DFARS, FARS.
And any questions about this? Because I'm here real quick. Chris says, will the tool identify FARS supplement clauses too, such as DFARS, AFARS, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to bore everybody with all the individual nuances of the clauses, but you can categorize them by how they fit. You can categorize them by what type of contract they apply to. You can categorize it by parent clause and regulation type so that you can filter down on those types of clauses. So it'll make your job easier when you're using it. I'd be happy to go through some use cases with somebody if they're interested in taking advantage of this tool.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and answer. I'm going to pop up a poll here for everybody. If you want to try it in pre-release, if you want to be a beta and be working with folks, great. Or maybe when Clause Manager is formally released or sometime in the future. And if you have any additional comments of the things that you'd like to see, this is where we're headed. I am super psyched about this, about what you guys are doing because of the complexities of the FAR, number one, and number two, when those clauses change, having that knowing immediately which ones are relevant. I'm telling you, this is good stuff. Great job.
The power of systematizing this, Dave, is you can actually do that, because how else would you be able to track unless you're managing your own manual sheet that says, okay, I negotiated this contract and it had a version from last year, but now we have an executive order to take advantage of this year's version. Okay, well, that's fine. But if you can keep these up to date, it doesn't take that long. I mean, once you do the lifting and you have a library, it's easy enough to say, swap this clause out for the next clause and then share that with your vendor. And it's a simple modification. It's the best way we could think of helping our vendor supply chain take control of their compliance, so they can not be at risk of, I don't want them to miss any requirements, obviously, but I also don't want them to be in a position where they can't pass an audit because they can't show that they're tracking these other than on the back of a napkin, you know.
And Tony said, with all the changes coming in FAR 2.0, right?
Yeah.
And being able to incorporate those changes and drive that down through the supply chain, and he says it. He says if you have the ability to make everything easy to track and record, you guys are going to make a fortune. So it's awesome.
I hope we can at least save our customers some money, time, and anguish. I wish I had something like this when I was doing the contracts management, Dave. I didn't have it. I was doing it another way, and I was like, hey, we got to do it better.
I couldn't agree more. And when I tell you, the team, you at Dacian, as well as the folks at Clause Manager, they get the compliance piece. And it's clear that you get it. And you've made some of the mistakes and got your teeth kicked in a couple of times with liquidated damages. No fun.
Yep.
That's not the fun part.
No, it's not. And Tony, absolutely. Let's talk. If you guys are interested in taking advantage of something, if you want to sway the way that we're building this product and get involved and give us your inputs on how you think you can make it better, happy to figure out something to make it worth your while. That's for sure.
That was just us. He says early entrants deserve a big discount. Yes. Yeah. And hey, you know, when I love finding folks that are just solving some of the biggest pain points. Anytime you're solving a pain point, it's a beautiful thing. Especially when it's not even my world, Reed. I like to sell stuff. I like to market. I like to be able to build relationships and develop opportunities and getting influence, get my fingerprints on the RFP and all that stuff, right? But what you're talking about is critical because it applies to everybody that's doing business with the feds. Everybody. Yep. And their subs. And their subs to the subs to the subs to the subs, like you did with Boeing. Good stuff. It's
inescapable, Dave.
It is.
We're gonna have to. You're gonna have to do it. No matter how much reform happens, this is not going away. The visibility on it, taking advantage of technologies is going to be the best way to do it.
Yep. And for everybody that said that they want to try it, you're going to get notification from Reed and Clause Manager, depending on where you are in your systems. Reed, you handle stuff that's much more complex, larger with SAP type folks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we handle the really tough ones with the people that have tens of thousands of vendors, and that becomes a much more complex animal. but we help people all the way down this level. If you're just looking for insights or you're somewhere out, don't hesitate to contact me at any time, obviously, or Dave. But yeah, if you want to look into the use of this tool, please let us know. We'd love to talk to you.
Yep. Well, we got folks that are saying they want to. Thank you for answering those polls. Thank you for joining us today. Great job, Reed. Good, real good. Real
Oh,
good.
of course. No, it's great. It's my pleasure. I love doing these chats with you, Dave. But I hear people wanting to think about it more. I hope, like I said, I hope if nothing, I gave you some tools to go out and think about this, so you can avoid some of the mistakes that I've made and get a little more organized.
And I will get the slides into the handout link. They'll just magically appear in a little bit after I close this down. I want to make sure that you have the latest. And we'll also make sure we get the updated version so that we're not disseminating fake information, Reed, or ancient. So we'll get it all to everybody. Thanks very much for everybody joining us. Reed, great job. I'll make sure you get all the information. The thumbs up if Reed did a good job. Thanks. Pray, the claps, whatever you do. There we go. There it is.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Great to meet you all. Hopefully, we'll hear from you soon. Thanks, Dave.
You bet. See you.